25 minutes between us. And so welcome to the Advanced Recycling session at Circularity 20. I'm joined by Jodie Morgan of Green Mantra and Mitch Toomey from BASF today, which is going to make for some very interesting conversations, given that, you know, in this virtual room today, we have the technology provider that's taking hard to recycle plastics and producing valuable, you know, products out of that. We've got a chemical company that is helping to pilot, test, and scale technologies in Germany. And then my team at Closed Loop Partners, we're investors in this space, we're researchers in this space, trying to understand how to sustainably and viably scale this sector here in North America. So before we get started, just 2 points before introductions, or rather 1 point. Advanced recycling also refers to chemical recycling. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll be using that phrase. I think it's a little bit more inclusive of the diversity of the processes that are encompassed in the sector. And not all processes use chemicals to break down these plastics. When CLP, or closed loop, refers to advanced recycling, we're also talking about biological processes that break down plastic. So with that, I will hand it over to Jodie and Mitch. Let's do a fire round of introductions. Please introduce your company and how you fit into the ecosystem for advanced recycling.
Mitch, you want to go first?
Thank you, Mitch Toomey, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed the rest of the sessions and glad to participate in one. BASF is the world's largest chemical company by volume, with operations around the world. We have a particular kind of corporate mission to be the most sustainable chemistry company. We're headquartered in Europe, where the kind of bar is set very high, and so we work on all kinds of innovations to help people make stuff. And so we use all kinds of different feedstocks and all kinds of innovation to achieve the performance and kind of behaviors of the materials that people want. Now, sustainability is one of the big things that people are asking us for. So we're working on, making sure that all this recyclable content that's out there has a place to go and actually be recycled. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
And for Green Mantra, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Have been enjoying a lot of the sessions so far, and hopefully this will be something of interest to others as well. At Green Mantra, we take post-use plastic and we convert that into specialty additives. A lot of times people don't know what that is, so the way that I normally describe it is yeast. So if you have dough and you add a small bit of yeast, so a small part of the total recipe, you get bread versus a cracker. So, and it's really hard to get the bread if you don't have the yeast. So we're similar to that. So a small percentage of our product goes into our customers' formulations and creates an impact that they typically can't get without our product. We've been commercial since 2016, and we've been around since 2011. And today we sell a variety of products into a variety of applications, everything from roofing to plastic processing. So that's Green Mantra.
Thank you. And throughout the sessions, or any plastic conference that you go to, and even throughout Circularity 20 in these last 2 days, the stats around the plastic problem, the plastic waste that's ending up in our landfills and in our environment are well known and documented. And advanced recycling is a unique set of diverse technologies that really offer, I think, a unique or a wonderful opportunity to kind of close the loop on plastics. But I would love to hear from your perspective, what is on the table with advanced recycling? What do we stand to gain from your perspective?
Jodie, you want to start us off?
Sure. So when I look at advanced recycling, I consider it completely complementary to mechanical recycling. And a lot of times when we talk about mechanical recycling, you'll hear about some of the challenges if you have the wrong form, like if it's in film, or if you have smaller components. They just don't go through the process really well. But there's another aspect that we don't think about with the traditional mechanical recycling, and that's the end use for the products once they've been recycled and sorted and washed and processed. And oftentimes they're handicapped because of the first use. So when plastic was first used in its first application, we put additives into that to make it function well. And those additives oftentimes can limit the places where the product can be used at the end. So if you take carpet as an example, you use a lot of polypropylene in carpet, but you put a lot of additives in it, so it'll process through the mill, so it'll be really durable. It'll work in your homes and at conventions and other places. But those additives don't go away. Well, with advanced recycling, we don't necessarily care. We're interested in the molecule, and our processes can tolerate these impurities. So we can help things like carpet to find a new home. So it's not just form and size, it's also the way we want to use plastic the first time that can limit its ability to be recycled. So that, again, they really complement each other beautifully.
That's right. I would just add that, our customers, we're always amazed at the innovations that our customers are coming up with and asking us for help in solving. But the average consumer might not realize that a plastic film or a bag protecting a loaf of bread or something actually consists of a lot of layers of different chemistry. And so that's some of the, it's not just that it gets gummed up in the mechanical recycling machines, but actually the composition of it is kind of it's multiple technologies within it. And so I think that just as Jodie said, we see them as molecules, and it's just a question of getting them back into the molecular state. And so the big kind of headline on advanced recycling is that the market has grown to an extent that we now can do the investment in actually commercializing and bringing to scale technologies that have been around for a while, but can now be optimized to take those kind of complex materials back into a process that doesn't just kind of grind them up as you might do with a drinks bottle, but actually takes them back down into the chemical building blocks. And once you've achieved that, then you're basically have virgin grade material, the same quality that you might get from an original other feedstock that you might otherwise have to get out of petroleum or something else. So we know the quality is in there, and we're very excited to see that the demand is now such that we can actually come in and commercialize and supply a customer with exactly the same performance and exactly the same material, but coming from a recycled feedstock instead of a virgin one. It's an incredibly exciting time.
And I think the point that both of you make is that one, advanced recycling perfectly complements mechanical recycling by being able to process these hard to recycle plastics, but also that the plastics waste problem is very diverse and very large, and we don't tend to think of our clothing as plastic, but in fact, the majority of clothing in the market today is largely polymer based. And so these advanced recycling technologies offer solutions not only to these multi-layer plastics in the market, that is like a chip bag, for example, but also materials that currently have no end of life solutions. That's great.
And I think the other thing is that because we're taking this molecule and we're making new products, sometimes it does go back into that circle of plastic to plastic, right? If we go down to the building block, we can potentially make it back into a virgin-like product. But in some of the companies, we're, instead of going down to the building block and rebuilding, we're actually just making new products. And that's creating new uses for plastic to be recycled outside of just plastic to plastic. Which isn't, again, possible if you're just trying to bring in and clean up the plastic and then use it in that traditional circular economy of plastic to plastic.
So like an open loop system as opposed to a closed loop system where it's bottle to bottle or textile to textile. But
exactly, we think about it as thinking outside the circle or expanding the circles or creating new circles. Yeah. But it really does add to the markets and the places where these products can be used effectively.
Yeah. So like, how do we, answering the question of like, how do we keep as much carbon in our economy as possible, or cycle carbon? And that's great. So I want to move on to my next question. The plastic waste crisis, it exists in every part of the world today. It's global, it's complex. Our viewpoint is that, we might have lost Mitch, but.
We did.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure to log back in. Oh, there he is.
Sorry.
No worries. This is a global this is a global challenge, and closed loop partners as investors in the circular economy, we recognize that addressing these global problems is going to take every tool in the toolbox: reduction, refill, reuse, but yes, also advanced recycling. I'm curious to get your perspective on this. Like, is it possible to get to a zero waste future without technologies like advanced recycling?
Mitch, you want to take that one first?
Well, I think, we all have to have aspirations for having the tightest circles we can, the most efficient ways of doing this. We're demonstrating, our part of the job is to show that you can do this. We can take those kind of complex materials and bring them back to full reuse. And I think that's where we are in this kind of maturity of showing that it is possible. I think there's a lot of hurdles to overcome about the business models and other things. And, you're dealing with the investors all the time. I think what we're seeing, and I think that this important signal to get out of this session is that our customers, whether they be, consumer packaged goods or the automotive industry, they're setting very kind of ambitious targets for having recycled content in their products, right? And so that's kind of it lays down the gauntlet for us to innovate and say, okay, well, we can find a way to make sure you have the same level of performance, but with recycled content. And so then that gives us the ability to go down our supply chain to the recyclers and the MRFs and others and say, okay, we're ready. We need more of this. And so I think if you can stimulate the economy and the kind of the supply and demand starts to take effect, then that becomes interesting for investors, and it builds a much larger capacity to actually get some of these materials recycled. Can we get to zero waste? I think there's going to be a lot of efforts in that direction, and I think we have to take the first steps. But proving that the circle is possible, and proving that this material, just like any other, could be recycled if we put our minds to it, and the economy lines up. So that's where we're doing our part.
Yeah, and I think adding to that, a lot of these technologies are becoming more and more economically viable, and a lot of them already are returning profits to their stakeholders as well as their shareholders. But I think one of the important aspects of that is when you ask the question of can you get there without it, I guess my answer is maybe, but why would you? Like, why would you limit one of the viable options that provides other economic outlets for these types of products? What we're doing today doesn't work. So why would you cut off something? I don't think that we need to try to fit all solutions through one circle. Mm-hmm. And to me, this problem is large enough that there just isn't one size fits all. We know that, advanced recycling is and can continue to be an economic viable outlet for, this product. And so for me, the question is not can you, it's why would you do anything but pursue these parallel paths for a solution?
And
well said.
Mitch, I want to go back to a point that you made you both made about these technologies providing returns, about the demand for these outputs being real. When Closed Loop Partners put out its report in 2019, kind of outlining the scope and landscape of technology companies and the market opportunity. But in North America, we found that the market opportunity is to the tune of $120 billion across polymers, monomers, and hydrocarbons markets. So there's definitely opportunity there for investors, for brands. The demand is crystallizing in the form of commitments made through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastic Economy, and other industry commitments around circularity and recyclability. And Jodie, to your point, there are many technology companies around the world that are operating at commercial scale. And yet, we are far from, especially from a North American perspective, seeing advanced recycling technologies being industry commercialized or available commercially. Would love to get your thoughts on, what is it going to take? And it's going to take a couple of things from my perspective, but what is it going to take for us to scale the sector globally and perhaps here in North America?
Well, I can say a couple things on that. I mean, first of all, we're a global company, so we're operating in multiple markets, and we're headquartered in Europe. Europe happens to have regulation that calls for kind of targets in recycling as a society, and so I think that has been a driver that's allowed us to progress and created the business conditions for us to actually commercialize some of these really advanced techniques, to the extent that we now have commercial volumes, and we're doing this in Europe. We've acquired a pyrolysis company, making this real, and we have commercial customers putting products back out onto the market that have been recycled. Now, the forces in the U.S. are a bit different. It's a kind of a market-driven system. We're not seeing that regulatory pressure, at least at the federal level, but we are seeing consumer behavior and consumer expectations, and we're seeing that trickle back through the supply chain. So now, as I said, our customers are setting their own demands upon themselves. And so I think once you have the scale, and the fact that we are actually going through those iterations and the innovation cycles in Europe to perfect this and get it to a kind of an economically predictable scale, then that you get over that hump, you get over that first few iterations, and it actually becomes much less risky of an operation. I think if it's always you always have to look at things in terms of risk. What's the risk of getting into this market? The financial risk. I think the kind of the tipping point is here, where the risks of not doing it are almost economically as significant as the risks of doing it. And so I think that's why we're seeing like this, where it's about maybe we can do this someday, but seeing how companies are actually doing this now, you get to a tipping point in a market, and then it becomes economically disadvantageous to not get involved. And so I think that's the exciting part of where we are.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that, Mitch. Like when you look at the big iconic companies, yours being one of those. I mean, you've had decades to develop that scale, right? And that scale really amplifies returns. And so for some of these earlier stage companies, some of it is just time. I love to hear the stories of success, and we do, but you typically hear the last year. You don't hear about 20 years before. And one of the ones that I love, I'm from Delaware, and so Gore-Tex started here. And Bill Gore started that product at 58. The first time he had a product that I thought was patentable was 69, and it was 76 before it was commercial. So it's 20 years. Now, I don't expect that all of these companies that we're moving forward are all going to take that long. There's companies that are already, as I mentioned, profitable and returning profits to their shareholders. But we can't forget that these things do take time, and scale takes time, right? So when you get to that tipping point, when you've got enough infrastructure where the next dollar of revenue, most of that can drop down, great, you're there. But it will take a bit of time for some of the companies to get there. And I think that there's an awful lot that we can do. I think it's great for me to see that it's not just the early stage companies now, but it is these big iconic companies that are getting interested. And, people always go to, well, what can they do? What can they do? Well, the first thing is money. Well, sure, that's great. I mean, there's no small company that's going to turn that down. But there's so many other things, right? You guys have paths to market that as a smaller company, we haven't established yet. Anytime I get to go into one of your laboratories, you guys have more toys than, any could hope for, right? So, having access to those sorts of things and that ability to bring these will help these technologies to move much, much, much more quickly. The other thing, Paul cut me off. I love this topic. Sorry. The other thing that I'm an American, but I get to run this Canadian company, which is super fun. And the Canadian government has been very, very good at helping companies to get past some of these, stages that we have to go through as far as growth. And, again, money is great, and they'll do grants and things like that. But the other thing that they've set up are like mentoring programs. And because a lot of the people that are doing this are early stage, not just in their company, but in their career. So, I don't play a lot of golf, but one of the things that I learned early on is it was better for me to hit straight than to hit really long, because long could get me in the sand trap, but straight could get me straight down the fairway. And not having pitfalls, because you've got a good mentor along the way to help you, is really, really valuable. So I think there's a lot of things that'll help us scale. And I think there's a place for the large companies and the smaller companies to find ways to work together that'll accelerate that path. Okay, Paul, I'm done. I'm sorry.
Amen. No, that's great. And I would just say, the concept of advanced recycling, I mean, there's no mystery to it. It's just the next quantum leap of innovation. I mean, we just, it's not one technology or one thing. It's basically expanding the scope of what's possible, and looking at, developments in economies of scale and the technologies. As I said, these technologies have been around, and, people have been, hoping that they would get to this point of scale. But a company like ours, we make bets when our customers give us the confidence to do so. And so I think that we enjoy this kind of position in the market where we have an incredibly large kind of system, but it's only good enough if it meets the needs of our customers. And so what I think is really exciting is the consumer pressure is working. The consumer demand of having recycled content, of actually turning the bottle around and looking to see if there is recycled content in it. The consumer packaged goods brands, others are starting to pay attention to that and realizing that it might not be a huge competitive advantage to have fully recycled materials and packaging, but it's starting to become part of, the deal if you want to play the game. And so I think once you get to that point, then it's, the sky's the limit for creativity and innovation. And yes, there are a lot of mistakes that people make along the road and chemistry solutions that don't quite work. We've been through so many of those iterations now, and we're very happy to see our kind of other companies around us doing different approaches that have very interesting results as well. And I think that just builds a market for it. We then are going to have a big demand for this recycled content, and that will stimulate investments in recycling infrastructure and so on. And there's some great questions going on this chat board. I don't know if you're following that, and I just wanted to put a plug in. We've got one of our experts, Zach Dowling, who's kind of right in the weeds on this in there, and he's jumping in and answering some questions. So if you want to dive in, he's gonna be the guy to give you some more kind of the behind the scenes of how this is being done. But I do agree that it's time, and we're seeing that certain markets are maturing, certain regions are realizing that this could be a huge competitive advantage if they can dominate this technology and do this. Then it's not going to be a question of where do we send the barge of this plastic waste. It's going to be which port. There's going to be an auction for getting that stuff because there's going to be so much value in the molecules that are contained in that material. And I think that's what's really exciting right now.
Yeah, I agree. There are different market dynamics that have existed than even 5 years ago, in the form of policy, market incentives, the changing of demand, the growing demand, Mitch, as you say, because of consumer pressure. And I want to be mindful of time. So my last two questions are going to be kind of like rapid fire round, but what we're suggesting to commercialize, to integrate these technologies into our existing infrastructure. It's not cheap. We're talking about like building new supply chains. Who do you think is going to, invest in this first? Or like who should be responsible for this? Who should pay? Who wants to? I'd love to get your thoughts on, like who's coming to play.
Go ahead, Mitch.
Well, I think there's different ways to incentivize this. We're seeing regulatory pressure in Europe, and that's one model. You add an externality cost to it, and suddenly there's a business case for it. There's a kind of a premium to be made. In the States, we're not seeing that directly. We are seeing that state by state, and that it becomes a little risky for some of our customers to sell into California and elsewhere if they don't have recycled content. And so they're starting to put the investments in because they don't want to be boxed out of that big market. And so I think that one important thing to remember is that if you're talking about the plastic packaging, for example, for a product, even if you add 10% to the cost of that packaging, the packaging is 1 or 2% at most of the cost of the product, right? And so you're talking about, you may see incremental costs added into the end user cost overall, but at these scale we're talking about, the proportion of cost that is passed along down the supply chain and down to the consumer is minimal. We're not going to see a doubling and tripling of the cost of things people buy. It's going to be the inevitable cost of progress. These things happen, and that's what we're already seeing in certain cases. Canada's doing a very interesting with tax credits and other things. I think we're seeing markets around the world step up to this. And there's a whole category of content, and I invite people to explore extended producer responsibility, which is a phrase that's been used in a lot of contexts, but now we're starting to see that applied to the plastic waste issue. So maybe there is some kind of financial model that will be shared across the supply chain. And I think that might be the future of how this gets paid for.
Okay, Jodie, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're at time. And so I want 3-second kind of final thoughts on advanced recycling. Let's start with Jodie.
So I think we're just at the beginning stages of a lot of the great things that we're going to see. There's so many smart minds that are getting behind this and so many companies that have decided this is a path that they want to take. So for me, I think that the future for this is just going to continue to expand and grow, and we're just going to see more and more successes. It's a perfect outlet for a product that has value but needs a second place to live.
And I would just say follow the science, look carefully at the carbon impacts and all these things. And I think that there is a solution. If we get our act together and all work together, this plastic waste will become, incredibly valuable to us and won't be seen as waste anymore.
And I encourage all of those on the line to follow Closed Loop Partners. We're leading a research project to develop an investor roadmap, which includes LCA analysis of different processes, an economic and policy view specific to North America. It has been the fastest 25 minutes of my week, but thank you, Mitch and Jodie and everyone on the line for taking time out of your afternoon to connect. I look forward to seeing you all later.
Thank you. Good job, Jodie, and thank you very much, Paula. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Nice to see you guys. Take care.
Right.
Bye.